What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. So, we're back with another playoff matchup video. Today, we'll be discussing the Battle of Florida, the Florida Panthers, defending Stanley Cup champs, versus the Tampa Bay Lightning, who finished ahead of them in the standings this year. Obviously, these two teams, both from the state of Florida, have been battling it out in the playoffs in the past couple of years. Most notably last year, where the Florida Panthers took them out in five, and obviously they went on an incredible run to win the Stanley Cup last year. And there was a meeting during the COVID season in 2021, and then again in 2022. So a familiar foe for these past 5 years or so. But we go into these playoffs, and it's a different dynamic than it was last year. Last year, Florida was going into the playoffs with a ton of momentum, finishing the season off strong, and it doesn't seem to be the case this year. Despite not having Matthew Tkachuk and also Alex Barkov to finish off the year, the team has looked flat at times, and they've dropped a lot of results down the stretch. They were a point away, if you look at the standings, with being eclipsed by the Ottawa Senators for that seeding, but nonetheless they finished third in the Atlantic and go up against a Tampa team that has been looking scary down the stretch. Luca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Tampa looks Tampa looks like a really, really good team. I think they ended the season pretty strongly. 5-2-3 in their last 10 games isn't a crazy record, but they got points in their last final 10 games, and they found a way to win hockey games. Florida only 3-6-1, right? And we'll jump right into it for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, if you look at some of their stats this season, obviously Nikita Kucherov, 121 points in 78 games. He was fantastic this season. Finished the season with 84 assists, which is absolutely ridiculous and just absurd. Brandon Hagel had a 90-point year, 35 goals, 55 assists. He had a really solid season. Reached a 90-point plateau, which is kind of unheard of, especially for a player of Brandon Hagel's caliber. He's a guy who I think has really steadily progressed as seasons have gone along, especially in Tampa Bay this year. Hitting the 90 points threshold was a big accomplishment for him, and he had a really good year. And then you got Braden Point and Jake Gensel, and if you look at both those guys, both 40 goal scorers, Jake Gensel with 41, Braden Point with 42, 82 points and 80 points respectively. So they have four guys on their team that have had at least a point a game, which is absolutely fantastic for them. Victor Hedman with a great season as well, 66 points in 79 games, and Cirelli with 59 in 80, and then it kind of drops off a little bit to the more depth guys. And then obviously we look at in goal, Andrei Vasilevskiy played 63 games this year, 38, 20, and 5. He had 6 shutouts and a 921 save percentage. So Vasilevskiy was spectacular this season for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their backup, Jonas Johansson, 9-6-3, 1 shutout, 895 save percentage. Not the best numbers for him as the backup, but isn't really expected to see any games at all unless an injury happens to Vasilevskiy. But
right.
Just kind of jumping in for Tampa Bay a little bit, this is a team that is really just a high octane offense kind of team. They've got some superstar talents everywhere in the lineup, whether it's on D or in forward, right? Nikita Kucherov, like we mentioned, Hagel, Point, Gensel, these are all big name players that can be absolute difference makers in the playoffs. But then the other thing too is they also made some acquisitions during the trade deadline. They acquired Yanni Gourde, who played 21 games for the Tampa Bay Lightning, 1 goal, 13 assists, 14 points. They brought him back from the Seattle Kraken after he was eventually traded there a couple of years ago. He was brought back during the trade deadline and had pretty good production in his return. And they also brought in Oliver Bjorkstrand, 18 games played for him, 5 goals, 4 assists. He had 9 points during that time with Tampa Bay. He is currently injured, listed as week to week, is expected to miss the start of the series. So that could be a blow for the Tampa Bay Lightning. If you look at their lineup as it's currently situated right now, Yanni Gourde is on the first line with Point and Kucherov. I don't know if these lines are going to change. They're not fully up to date, but this is what we have currently. Brandon Hagel's on the second line with Cirelli and Gensel. Then the third line is Gage Gonsalves with Nick Paul and Connor Geekie, and the fourth line being Darren Radish, Zemgus Girgensons, and Cam Atkinson. Like I said, there could be some changes here and there.
Bjorkstrand probably on that third line, I would assume, when he comes back.
Right, and Darren Radish is a defenseman, so he probably will be a healthy scratch if he doesn't play, or maybe they'll rotate their D a little bit. And then if you look at their D, Victor Hedman and JJ Moser, Ryan McDonough and Eric Chernak, and then Nick Perbix and Emil Lilleberg. And then obviously in net, we have Johansson and Vasilevsky. And obviously the injuries, Luke Glendening, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Mitchell Chaffee. So just, depth guys, and then Bjorkstrand. So Zach, what are your thoughts? You look at this Tampa Bay team and you look at just how well they had this season, the production they got from their top guys. And do you think that, they can replicate this in the playoffs and beat a team like the Florida Panthers, who we're going to get into with all their injury troubles as well?
Well, I think one thing to point out is that the Panthers have really been having their number as of late. Since March of 2023, the Panthers have won 10 out of 13 games versus the Lightning. So they've really had their way with them. And, despite the form of both teams right now, and, Tampa does look like the team that's hotter, I think it's something that's still of note. But they did play each other recently, as recent as April 14th. And the Lightning dominated that game and won 5-1. And that was kind of like your playoff preview, right? It was an intense game, guys missing on both sides, but nonetheless, this is more or less the same of what you're going to have getting into the playoffs. And, a lot of these guys are going to still be, most of these guys are going to be playing out that series within the lineup. So pretty good representation. And I think it's basically could be telling of what's to come in the playoffs. We could have a series that is either going to go one of two ways. I think one way is that the Lightning dominate this series. Vasilevsky has been incredibly dominant this year, and he's past his injury woes, and he's back to 100% health, and he's looked incredible this year. Played in a lot of games too. It's to note that last year he didn't play much, and then this year he's back to a 63 game workload, as we see on the screen, and he's been amazing. 920 save percentage. The win column, the goals against average, which is 2.18. I'm seeing on the screen.
Yep.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And he's back to being a dominant force in the net. But there's obviously Bobrovsky on the other side as well, who came clutch for them in big spots in the playoffs last year. So I think for Florida is, you have to find a way to get your momentum back. And, they haven't been playing well. They've looked like they've been out battled physically down the stretch. And I don't know if this is a question of, the past 2 years and all the games that they played catching up to them, because they did play in 20 plus games in both playoff runs, obviously to get to the Stanley Cup final twice, and plus, the 82 game stretch. Is this group worn out now? And that's a wait and see, but it's hard for me to say that with certainty that, they're going to game one of the playoffs, they're going to completely turn it around. I know they're actually, putting the LTIR situation in their favor this year, which is something that Tampa's always done, right, throughout the years. And they're going to get Matthew Tkachuk back. And, obviously the additions they made at the deadline, like I said, Jones, who's been playing well for them. So they're going to have a really talented group on paper, but are they going to be able to put it together? And, kind of use the momentum they've had in past years against Tampa, against them is still a wait and see. But the Tampa group, nonetheless, I think this year they have a different element than they did last year, right? Bringing Ryan McDonough back, they needed a guy they needed a shutdown top four to add to their mix. I know they lost Sergachev, but if you look at the fit, Victor Hedman is their offensive guy. So he took on basically all of the he's taking on all the responsibility this year of being, the primary focus on the power play, 5-on-5 ozone situations, etc. And, he's still one of the best in the biz, right? And when you add a Ryan McDonough, you still have Eric Chernak. JJ Moser he missed some time this year, but has been a nice add to their blue line as well. I think what they fix is that they have a blue line that they can rely on all situations, and it's pretty consistent this year compared to last year. That's a big boost for them. And obviously Vasilevsky being back to himself between the pipes is a big one. So I'm going to say that Tampa is a different team this year. And I'm going to say it. I think they're going to shock the Panthers in the first round. I don't think the Panthers are going to go down easy, but I don't think it's a series that's necessarily going to go in 7. I know how talented the Panthers are, and it's not a team particularly want to bet against, but I
Right.
just look at Tampa the way they're built now, and they're ready to make a difference again. And which is crazy saying this because after last year, a lot of people counted them out, and a lot of people said like this is the end of their Stanley Cup run. But
Right.
that's not what my eyes are telling me, and I think Tampa is going to win this one in either 5 or 6.
That's interesting. I'm gonna agree with you on that. I'm gonna tell you why I agree with you on that. I want to just jump in straight to the Florida Panthers and give an explanation as to, kind of how their season went, and also just give my opinion as to like why I don't think they have it this season. You look at their obviously statistics. Sam Reinhart had a really good year, 81 points in 79 games. Didn't have the same output that he had the year before,
No,
right, in terms of production, but still point a game player. Alex Barkov, same thing, 71 points, 51 assists, 20 goals in 67 games. Matt Tkachuk missed time, but during the times that he was healthy, 57 points at 22 goals. Carter Verhaeghe at 53, Sam Bennett at 51 points, and then it drops off, right? And obviously, if you look, Aaron Ekblad, 33 points in 56 games. He's a notable name in the sense that obviously he missed the last 20 games of the season due to a suspension for PEDs. So he hasn't played and is also expected to miss game 1 and game 2 of the first round of the playoffs. Should be back for game 3 against the Lightning. So that's obviously a big blow for them. The other thing about Florida is obviously they made that acquisition for Seth Jones, 9 points in 21 games, a -6. But if you look at their lineup right now, and obviously they've also acquired Brad Marchand, it's not that good, right? Like Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand. Obviously, they've rested some guys, so daily faceoff is not 100%. But Barkov's in this lineup, and he'll probably be on the first
Kachuk
line.
is for sure going to be there for game
Right,
1.
Kachuk's going to be there as well. So you're adding Kachuk and Barkov to a lineup that's already, let's say, depleted in terms of injuries. So you're adding these guys back into lineup. Obviously, you've got Anton Lundell and Sam Reinhart as well. So they're definitely going to get a lot of their offense back. But I think the big question is going to be on defense, right? Like even with the acquisition of Seth Jones, they brought in Seth Jones. They obviously lost Ekblad during the time that they brought in Seth Jones. They're going to get Ekblad back within game 3. But at that point, it could be already, let's say, a 2-0 series for Tampa. So they'll be getting a player back at a crucial part in their series if that's the case, or even if the series is 1-1 or maybe 2-0 Florida, they're going to be getting a player back at the start of the playoffs, which I think is good. The other thing about this, though, is I don't necessarily like Florida's defense, right? Like you look at their team right now, right? And it goes Aaron Ekblad and Seth Jones when Ekblad comes back. Gustav Forsling is going to be in that lineup alongside, let's say, Nate Schmidt or Nico Mikkola, right? And then let's say your third pairing is Kulikov and Schmidt or Kulikov and Mikkola. It's not the most elite defensive core. And the other thing too that I want to add to this is if you look at their production in net, right? Obviously, Brad Marchand also came in, played 10 games at 4 points. Doesn't seem like the fit has really worked out for him in Florida, at least during those 10 games. But again, Marchand is built for the playoffs, so you'll probably see a better production out of him in the playoffs. The thing that I think is a little bit of a concern, and you talked about this before, one, I think, is Florida's defense. Number 2 is Sergei Bobrovsky. 33 wins, 19 losses, 2 overtime losses, 905 save percentage this year, right? 5 shutouts, 244 goals against. Now, yes, there's arguments to be made that I think this season, especially the last 20 games or so, you can argue that the reason why maybe his production hasn't been at the best this year is because of the fact that obviously the defense in front of him wasn't very good. But this is a problem that I think we're going to see with Sergei Bobrovsky is his inconsistency. And I think last year, although he was really good for Florida, and I think he really stepped up his game in the playoffs, I think this year he was a little bit too inconsistent, right? And you look at his numbers and you compare them to Spencer Knight, who was traded in the deal for Seth Jones. Spencer Knight had a better production through 21 games, which is 23 games, which is a pretty good sample size. And then Vanacek came in and had an 890 with 2 wins and 4 losses. So I'm just not sure exactly where this series is going to go. Like I look at Florida, and obviously you mentioned before about us not betting against them, and I don't want to bet against Florida because I actually think they're a good team when everybody's healthy, right? You get Ekblad back, you get, Matt Tkachuk back. It's obviously a different team.
Massive. They're massive
Right.
upgrades.
They're massive upgrades to your team. They obviously make your team a lot better than what it currently is. But the thing is that I look at Tampa and I look at how well they've played this season, and I look at just the way Kucherov's played, the fact that they've had Point healthy, the fact that they've had Gensel healthy, right? Like being able to have those players play a full season or pretty much a full season, and being able to, kind of build that structure all season long, and then coming into the playoffs with that momentum and having a goaltender that is arguably in the running for the Vezina with Connor Hellebuck, I think that's a lot of confidence going into a team, right? Whereas Florida, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about, how good is Kachuk going to play on his return? Is he at 100% healthy, or are they rushing him back? The other question is, right, Aaron Ekblad hasn't really practiced, or I'm sure he's trained, but he hasn't really practiced with the team in over 20 games. How rusty is he going to be ready to go for game 3 of the playoffs, right? And then obviously the other thing too is, what type of goaltending are you going to get from Sergei Bobrovsky? Is this going to be a series where he's going to steal it like he did last year, or is he going to be the same inconsistent Bobrovsky that he's been all season? Right? Those are, I think, big question marks that unfortunately I just don't know if this is the season that Florida is going to be able to kind of overcome those difficulties. For that reason, I think I agree with you. I'm probably going to say that I think Tampa wins this in 6. I think Florida takes 2 games at home, but in my opinion, I like Tampa better. I think they're really well structured and really well coached, and I just love their forward group. I think Nikita Kucherov can win the series on his own, and the fact that they've got Andrei Vasilevsky at 100% and playing at 100% is a huge boost for the Tampa Bay Lightning, in my opinion.
I think so. I think so too. It's a big, you're going to get Tampa at full strength for the first time in maybe 3 years. You're going to get Tampa at full strength. But what I have to say is that, if you compare the size of these two teams, like obviously the Panthers were already a big team, and then they added in Seth Jones. Right. And obviously, big physical presence for them is Matt Tkachuk. You add a guy who's got the feistiness and a Brad Marchand. Right. And it could just be chaos, man. Like imagine you go into the series, and obviously I forgot about Sam Bennett as well, who's obviously played a big role for Team Canada, 4 Nations in a very, competitive series. But like these guys could wreak havoc in the playoffs. Like this is like, if you ever watched, like the Mighty Ducks series, like the Bash Brothers, like this is literally, or even like, for example, Slapshot with the Hanson brothers. Like these are what these 3 guys are. Like they're gonna ruffle feathers. They're not gonna take any prisoners, and they're just gonna will their way to success. And it's gonna be interesting to see like how the group actually meshes come playoffs, because we haven't seen these guys together. Brad Marchand comes in later in the season. Matt Tkachuk has been injured since the 4 Nations, so they really haven't been able to play together. Yes, he's played with Sam Bennett, but Marchand getting adjusted to a new team as well. Like you mentioned, I think we're going to see him kind of at full strength during the playoffs, and he's built for the playoffs, like you said. So, and I want to see, like, can Tampa? They're a team with a lot of skilled forwards, but do they have the physicality up front? They don't. They don't have the kind of physicality that Florida does. Like Gensel, Kucherov, Yanni Gord, even Borgstrand. Like these are not physical players, and even Brayden Point. They're competitive guys, that's for sure, but they're not physical players. And it's the TBD if Florida could take advantage of the physical aspect of the game against a team like Tampa, and make it hard for them to basically play their game, and it's to be see if that'll have an impact. Because you look at 2 years ago, the series Florida against Toronto, like Florida bullied them physically, from their decor, laying them out in the neutral zone, or closing small gaps and forcing them to work around like a very high line, and just the pure physicality of the game. They really beat up Toronto in that series, and I wonder if we could see a similar series to that one. That would probably be the ingredient for Florida to win the series, is really to rely on their physicality, but also their ability to be opportunistic. Because yes, this is a team that has so much high-end skill, but they're a team that is able to also just sit back, force you into mistakes, and capitalize on chances. So this series could really go a lot of ways, but we could only really assess on how we saw these two teams meet in the last bout in the regular season, and also like how they finished off the year, and what is the identity of these two groups. But obviously, Florida is going to surprise us, right? Either way, this is going to be a team with Matt Tkachuk back and finally teaming up with Brad Marchand, and Barkov back. Like this, Florida could really surprise us in this series. Is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But it's another one like we did yesterday with the Stars versus the Lightning. The Stars versus the Colorado. It's a
Right.
series that is so close,
It is.
and it's hard to tell, man.
Yeah, and I want to bring up a little bit of some stats. Tampa was first in the league in goals forward, fourth in the league in goals against, whereas Florida was 15th in the league in goals forward and seventh in the league in goals against. So the thing is that Tampa's had just a really good regular season. Like they've played really well from goals forward to goals against to special teams to just being just having their players produce at a high level consistently all season, right? And I think a lot of that, and like we mentioned before, was due to the fact that they've been relatively healthy all year, right? They haven't really lost anybody big to injuries, obviously apart from Bjorkstrand, but I'm saying like Kucherov's been healthy, Gansel's been healthy, Point's been healthy, even Victor Hedman, although he missed a little bit of time, was relatively healthy all year, right? So with Florida, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the physicality and stuff like that. I think that's going to play a big role. I think the reason why there's a little bit more doubt with Florida this year is because I think they're not at 100% and they're not at full strength,
They
right?
might
And
be
it's like
banged
we
up.
mentioned,
For all we know,
and,
they might be banged up going into the playoffs.
right,
Nobody's going to say anything. Probably
right.
won't admit to this, but they could be
No,
they're totally banged up.
but that's what it is, right? And so I think with Tampa Bay, you're seeing a team that is at like we mentioned before at 100% strength with pretty much their full roster and a goaltender that's at 100%, and you're getting a Florida team that we don't really know to what extent they're at 100%, right? Kachuk's coming back, and Kachuk's a playoff performer, and we all know the type of physicality that Matt Tkachuk can bring to the table. The problem with Matt Tkachuk is not a question of whether he can't produce in the playoffs, is he hasn't really skated. He hasn't really practiced with the team, right? He dealt with this injury during the Four Nations, hasn't really played a game, and now he's going to come in potentially for game one and be back in the lineup. I think there's a lot of concern about how healthy he really is and how much he's really going to be able to help the Florida Panthers out. And then, you look at Aaron Ekblad, and Aaron Ekblad's a really good defenseman, right? I think he had a really good season. He had 33 points before getting suspended. But the question with Aaron Ekblad is look, when you get suspended, you're not supposed to train with the team. You're not supposed to practice with the team. You don't get paid, right? So he hasn't been on the ice, at least not with the Panthers. And, he's probably trained on his own, but he hasn't really had the opportunity to get acclimated and really get himself into a game. So it's going to be a lot harder for him to just come back into the lineup after not practicing with the team for pretty much over 2 months or a month and a bit, right? And just kind of come into the system in the game 3 scenario and just, be the same defenseman that he was. So I think this series is going to be determined based on how game 1 and game 2 go, right? And Tampa's got the upper hand because they've got home ice advantage. So if Tampa can come out of game 1 and game 2, and if they can start the series with a 2-0 series lead, I think it's over this series. I think Tampa's going to win it in 5 or 6. If Florida can split one of the games, then I think it becomes a really interesting situation to see, okay, is Florida really, truly going to be able to do this again? And for me, I think, like I said, it's if I had to take a 7-game series today, I'm taking Vasilevsky over Bobrovsky. I know Bobrovsky won a cup last year and how good he was, but I'm just not convinced with Bobrovsky this season. And even with the fact that he had good numbers in the playoffs last year, I'm thinking that even though Florida beat Tampa in a 7-game series in 5 games last year, Vasilevsky wasn't at 100%. I think Vasilevsky at 100%, you're going to get the best version of him. I think it's going to be a lot harder for Florida to score goals already because Tampa was the 4th best defensive team in the league. But not only that, now you're getting a healthy Vasilevsky. And when Vasilevsky's healthy, he's arguably the best goalie in the league, unless you want to talk about Hellebuck. But what I'm trying to say is he's an elite goaltender, right? So I think that's what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. So I'm going to say Tampa in 6. I think they've got this in the bag. However, like Colorado and Dallas, and like Zach mentioned, this series can go either way. I think there's so many game-breaking players on both teams, and there's so many players that can make a difference that I think it wouldn't surprise me if Florida beat Tampa. I just think that Tampa's best chance of beating Florida this year is probably now because of the fact that Tampa's 100% healthy, and there's just a lot of uncertainty with the Panthers, and even just the way they've played, I don't think it's been relatively impressive either for Florida. And I think that when you go into the playoffs not playing your best hockey, sometimes it could affect the way you come out and the way you perform. So
Yeah,
that's
honestly, like towards the end of the year, Florida looked flat. Meanwhile,
right.
you have a team in Tampa that has averaged the most goals per game. They have a top 5 power play, a top
Right.
10 penalty kill. Um, this is a team that hasn't shied away this year, and there's a
No.
team that I think right now is like they're on top of the mountain coming in with momentum. It's a question is can Florida flip it around? I know you said, okay, if Florida dropped the first 2 games on the road, it's going to be hard for them to get back into the series. But at the same time, I think they're probably going to be more ready for the series game 3 than game 1, just based
Right.
on the fact you get not only you get Ekblad back, who's probably itching to get back into the lineup,
Right.
but you get finally some, you develop some chemistry between Matt Kachuk and the new guys that they added. But the team that's going to be most ready game 1, I think, is going to be Tampa, because there's the most continuity, and that's the only way to put it, really.
I agree. And I think it's gonna be a fun series. I always like the Battle of Florida. I think it's one of those series that both teams really hate each other, and you can tell just by the way they play. And I think that always makes the series fun. And when it's two really good teams that have both been really competitive and really, some of the best teams over the last, I would say, 5, 6, 7 years. I think it always makes it for fun hockey, and you love watching elite players, and both teams have elite players as well. So I think it's going to be a really good series. It's going to come down. I don't think there's going to be many blowouts, if any. I think it's going to be a lot of 1-2 goal games, maybe for either side in terms of the wins, maybe a couple of overtimes, which I think will be fun for fans to watch. But yeah, it's going to come down to, I think, just a game of inches, and whoever's going to be able to get the bounces, and who's going to be, I think, the most prepared and be able to take their chances when they present themselves, and how well. I always talk about this when I mention playoff series, but for me, goaltending is the biggest thing, because you're only going to go as far as your goaltender takes you. And I think for me this year, right, even though Vasilevsky is at 100% healthy, right, and Bobrovsky's been inconsistent. Obviously, Bobrovsky proved last year that he can do it. So I think for me, goaltending is going to play a factor. And like I mentioned before, goaltender takes you as far as you possibly go. Right, at the end of the day, if your goalie isn't producing, you're not going to win, because especially in the playoffs, there's so little games and so little room for error, that it's like if you have one bad game, that could affect your whole playoff series. So it's like you have to always constantly be, playing at your best and being consistent. So I think that's what I'll add to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think goaltending is going to play a big factor. You can't
Yeah.
afford to have below average goaltending in the playoffs. At least
Nope.
not for a consistent stretch of time. Edmonton kind of are the exception to that last year. They got inconsistent goaltending in the playoffs and still made the cup final.
Yeah.
But then we saw it in that final series that Bobrovsky was outclassing Stuart Skinner, and I think that played a big part in the final series
Yeah.
last year. So
Yeah.
guys, yeah.
I agree.
Anything else to add?
Nope. I'm good on my end.
So, guys, thanks so much for watching another video for the playoff matchups. We're going to be cranking out the rest of them before the playoffs start officially tomorrow.
Yeah, Saturday, 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock Eastern. Winnipeg and St. Louis is the first game.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered that video already for you guys.
Right.
It's just a question of getting it across to you. So guys, just stay tuned for that, and we're going to be continuing our coverage of the NHL playoffs as we go along. And as fans, we're going to be watching every series, and hopefully we're right on some of these predictions. But these are so hard to pick. We're just going to go in with an open mind and try to enjoy this time of year as much as we can.
Yes, sir.
So,
All right.
guys, it's been Zach
And Luca.
Thanks so much for watching. Peace.
Peace.